The story begins in a large metropolis, in which the sounds of explosions in a high-rise can be heard in broad daylight. Immediately, the guy runs to the scene of the accident with the last of his strength. You can see that he is really worried. People are standing in a panic and don't understand what it is and why there was an explosion. At that moment, a guy in a white hoodie ran up to them, who was really in a hurry because he was sweating a lot. The explosions did not stop, but only continued. There was no longer one, but 10 exactly the same strikes all over the skyscraper at once. Watch to the end. I promise it will be very interesting indeed. People did not understand what was happening and filmed it all on camera, because could it be that terrorists attacked the building? The buses and vehicles also stopped moving along the road and stopped for a while. But it was for nothing, because after a few seconds the huge stones were already falling toward the road, snagging people and cars that were standing next to them. Panic really swept over the city. Everyone was trying to hide from this horror and save their lives, as even innocent people were suffering. But the guy in the white hoodie kept running. Apparently, he really had some very important goal and knew what he was doing. At that moment, someone looked up at him and started laughing very hard. It was the guy with the blue hair who was glad he could find the guy. Immediately afterwards, he surrounded him with blows in such a way that he had no more to run forward, from which he was very much frightened, and looked in the direction from which the attack was coming. The guy with the blue hair jumped on the car and addressed him, saying, "Stop running away and just let him surrender nicely." This made the guy very scared and didn't know what to say, so he just kept quiet and looked on. His adversary moved even closer and asked in an aggressive tone, did his older brother's words not count for him? This was immediately followed by another wave of blaster blasts that destroyed and incinerated everything around them, and made people flee with the last of their strength in a burst of panic. But the situation began to gain even more aggressive momentum, as a really strong attack came down on the guy, behind which you could only see him and the fire nearby, and absolutely nothing else but shrapnel. The guy was very frightened, because everything around him was exploding, and it looked like it would not end well for him, because even the ground beneath his feet was falling down. All the traffic was going up and exploding. It was really unbearable and scary to be in that place. People panicked, didn't understand what they were going to do and how to escape from this. Everyone was trying to help each other in some way. At this point, his brother started flying in the sky already, with a machine gun looking for a guy who was hiding behind a red Range Rover and didn't know where to run. He noticed him right away and started laughing, and the guy was terrified of being found. But he didn't seem to see it, because he started threatening to tell me what would happen to him if he got his hands on it. The guy panicked and decided to figure out what to do, when suddenly, his phone started falling out of his pocket, and a second later it collapsed on the road, which he definitely could not have expected. After that, his brother made everything clear and stopped to load his weapon and look at the guy, who couldn't even imagine what was about to happen to him. He looked at his brother again, and sweat began to run down his face. But it didn't seem as bad as it seemed at first glance, for his brother immediately ran up to the phone that had fallen down. His eyes lit up and there was a really positive emotion on his face. He was glad he could find it now. He kept smiling and asked, "Is that really how it's going to end up, buddy?" He kept clacking on his phone and absolutely did not understand what to do with it. So he tried to figure out how to deal with it. And the guy just looked at it all and continued to be very frightened. At that moment, he closed his eyes and began to imagine the great basketball player, asking what would he do if he were him. Suddenly, it really hit him. That's why he asked his basketball player to lend him his legendary punching power. He then charged his fist and ran towards his older brother with tremendous force to punch him, while he just kept sitting there on his phone and was very happy about such a find. And then he received a very strong blow to the head with his fist, which he certainly could not have expected. It flew precisely into the target. He was thrown back several dozen meters at once with tremendous velocity. Moreover, it completely broke down several concrete barriers that were used to hold the building together. The guy was just shocked. He had absolutely no idea he was expecting this. Until that moment, he had no idea that his peaceful life would be shattered in an instant. Immediately afterwards, he was on his knees and a blue light was shining over him. He began to regret that he was just going to sell the shoes. But from that moment on, his life was completely turned upside down. And here we are in Seoul, at the subway station, where there are smiling people who are happy about their grades and in a very good mood. Buses and other cars passed quietly along the highway. Everything was fine, and the guy kept walking down the street with his phone and enjoying a nice day. The mood was just fine. In fact, he was in correspondence with some salesman to whom he informed him that as soon as he dropped off the goods, the deal would be done right away. He imagined money and rejoiced. And besides, last night's dream was great too. For some reason, he thought something good was going to happen. And just when he thought about it, he immediately got a call from Yeezy, to whom the guy told him that he would be at the meeting place very soon. He asked her not to worry and hung up. He had a huge smile on his face. This is the first money he will ever earn in his life, which is why he felt such emotion and ran to sell his goods. The girl stood there wearing glasses and a short red skirt, covering her hair with a hood. Though she looked a little suspicious, she looked like she was talking to someone on the phone. Immediately thereafter, he said the guy had the goods and he fit right in. She hid behind a wall and told him to come right away, because she thought she was being watched. But he didn't believe her and said she couldn't fool him. She also added that it was also lunchtime and was a little embarrassed. But her interlocutor was aggressive. Hadn't she already remembered that he can't talk when he's hungry? So she must remain calm and wait for a while until he finished eating. She was also angry, asking if he was joking with her because how could he be? Had he really lost his mind? That's right. I'm not in my right mind at all. And I'm starving. That's it. After that, he hung up, and the girl stood there bewildered, because she couldn't understand that a grown man would do that to her. She continued to shout into the tube with incomprehension. But what good was that anymore? Is he normal? Are all the guys here that weird? In the meantime, our guy was approaching the rendezvous point and hoped it would go well. He took out his phone again and looked at the exact location of the customer, who was very close to him. At this point, he opened his messages, in which the customer from yesterday wrote to him. He was very angry about the shoes he had purchased, because there was a big scratch on the backside. And was he paying that kind of money for that? After this, the guy started receiving threats of physical violence. But he couldn't figure out what it was. Does this customer even know the word IES? After all, he even gave him a 3,000 WON discount. So what more did he want from him? Nothing better than just deleting and blocking this contact the guy couldn't think of. So he did it right away. After that, he had very happy emotions, because he got rid of his annoying client, who was bothering him very much. And the girl kept talking to Kebabo, and told him that by the time she had finished her business, she had to be sure. But suddenly she stopped and was surprised as there were 2 small children standing in front of her, as well as 3 teenagers laughing at her and taking pictures with their phones. Turns out she was standing near a promotional exhibit that looked exactly like her. The girl knew immediately what a familiar situation this was. A little girl came up to her and said she knew her, because she had seen her on TV. So she asked again, just in case, if she was famous. From such amount of attention and paparazzi, girl was uncomfortable, and her face also began to show cold sweat and emotion of excitement. She began grabbing herself by the hood and didn't understand how the silly girl could have recognized her, for she hadn't yet noticed the moment she was standing in front of her mannequin. And so she sat down to her and started stroking her head, asking if this little girl really needed an autograph, right? The girl confirmed this and said she would wait, at which point they were surrounded on all sides by people with phones who kept laughing and showing their attention in this way. She asked me to wait a little while, and then she would give it to her. She took her head harder and tilted it toward her, telling her to be quiet. After all, more people were about to gather here because of her, which made her a little scared. So the girl suggested she just go home. But the child became very aggressive and grabbed the girl by the hair and then started pulling it in different directions, hurting the girl. She was surprised at such a reaction and tried to calm her down. But when nothing helped her, she immediately got up and started screaming. She couldn't understand why this girl was clinging to her so hard and wouldn't let go of her hair. The child became very aggressive and decided to go into battle. She wanted to wipe absolutely all the makeup off her face, and she didn't want the autograph anymore. She cried and started to run away. The star tried to stop her, asking her to take her words back and scaring her that she would punish her when she caught her. But the child didn't care at all and said she would tell her mother. Meanwhile, a guy was approaching the place where he was supposed to sell sneakers and was listening to music. A girl ran towards him, who had been shouted at in the back that she should live her whole life without a boyfriend. But he didn't even pay attention to her. The only thing he noticed was that for some reason he was really lucky today. The child looked at him and started screaming. Then our hero noticed him just the same, but he didn't quite understand what was going on. Suddenly, she started flying right at him and waving her arms, telling him to get out of the way immediately. He also reprimanded her, telling her to be more careful and look around or she might get hurt. And he was still keeping a positive attitude as suddenly another girl was running behind him, who caught him with her body, and there was a feeling as if she wanted to hug him. He didn't understand what was going on, and a second later the girl completely fell on top of the guy and took him with her. He was shocked by this and fell to the ground with great force, after which he smashed his nose. And how to react to that is not clear. So the guy got up and got very aggressive. He started yelling, just begging the pedestrians to at least watch where they were going. What the hell is this? Where are they all going in such a hurry that they're even hitting people? But still the view in this situation, he decided to see what kind of person it was that hit him. So he turned around and saw a really beautiful girl beside him, which made him feel a little shocked. He looked at her again and saw exactly the same pretty woman as on the billboard of the truck. His happiness was boundless. He tried to compare who she was, and once again he stared at her very intently. And now, after it finally came to him, he was in a stupor. He got a little embarrassed and started asking if the girl was okay, because she must have been really scared. But she just fell to the ground and couldn't come to her senses. She said people were watching. Why jump out of the way so suddenly? The boy pointed out that she was very rude, but she seemed harmless enough. She just told the kid to be careful, and made a point of saying that she was really very annoyed by this world. Could you turn it off somehow? At this point, she was very much frightened and immediately got to her feet. Wait, the soul arc. Where is it? After that, she really started to panic and quickly ran to her phone. There it was. Phew, the scare almost made her life 10 years shorter. Seriously. I'm sorry, Mrs. Cherry. Didn't mean to bump into you. Are you hurt? But the girl really reacted very strangely. She looked at the guy, and even though she was the culprit, she still could not understand what was going on with him, because she was fed up with him, and why did he keep talking to her? After a guy saw such a beautiful girl, he lost the ability to think rationally. That's why he started hitting on her, saying it wasn't just a dream. It was a sign. But the girl just asked him to back off and pushed him away with her hand. But the guy started to panic and get upset that his happiness was running away from him right now. He immediately thought what was wrong with him. But in the meantime, the girl had already run away, because of this stupid schedule, she has to take everything into her own hands. But it looks like it's not all bad, because the newest Porsche is parked in front of the building, and some girl is standing next to it. And now, the guy with blue hair, who is also a superstar, and who a lot of girls are fans of, is already getting out of it. because the newest Porsche is parked in front of the office building, with his fan standing next to it. He immediately went to his manager, asking why he called him in, but he was immediately given a small reprimand for being late, but still came. He put his hands on the table and said in his excuse that he was really busy. After that, his interlocutor just folded his arms and asked, "Why doesn't he come a little earlier next time?" The guy was puzzled. Couldn't he understand that he didn't have time? How long would it take? He also wondered how quickly he would be free. The manager immediately folded his arms and decided to clarify if he had done a good job, right? He worked like a horse? Has he forgotten? This question made him a little surprised. But the manager immediately laughed and went on to say that if he went and looked at what he meant, he would immediately understand everything. Truth be told, we've been very quiet all these years, but we've never had a problem like this before. He smiled again and asked again if he really worked hard, didn't he? His eyes were multicolored, and he seemed to be up to something. After all, today, they're taking control of everything. At this point, the guy with the blue hair got behind the wheel of the Porsche and asked, "Is he looking forward to this?" Then he gave the gas on the road and started to overtake everyone. But back to our guy in the white hoodie. He really wanted to stop the beautiful girl, because he wasn't messing with her, and he really was. She was really beginning to realize that she was in trouble, and she wondered if the shoebox was really in his hands. She just started begging the universe that it wasn't so, and she started hitting the shoebox with all her might, smiling at the same time. The guy tried to stop her, but he didn't succeed. After that, he really started crying a lot because he couldn't have expected that. These were his favorite sneakers that his parents had given him as a birthday present. They had their own story. They were Jordans from the collection that the legendary basketball player wore. And so these sneakers from such a strong impact immediately reached the highway, or to be more precise, just fell on the road on which the Porsche was driving just towards them. The guy saw the whole picture and just couldn't hide his emotions. He really started crying a lot. At this point, the driver was just picking his nose and wasn't worried about anything, unlike the guy who just kept crying. And then the sneakers are almost under the bumper of the car, and a second later the Porsche runs them over completely with both wheels. They were very badly torn and had lost their marketable appearance. The guy with the blue hair noticed that something had gone wrong, but he didn't pay any attention to it. Our hero walked over to his sneakers, which were almost unrecognizable, and just fell on his knees in front of them. It was obvious that he really valued and loved them very much. He lifted one sneaker up to see what happened to it, and from what he saw, just continued to cry, because he did not understand why this is happening to him now. He just wanted to make some money and sell his sneakers. At this point, he remembered a place where you can sell them quickly. It was Seoul Yoksam, to be exact, the online shopping mall which sold things, but not the original, but copies. But there were no other options. I had to make at least some money. It was an offline store where you come in and you can try on any shoes on yourself. He immediately put these red Jordans in front of him, which he tried to make as marketable as possible. And, let's face it, he succeeded. They stood out from the rest of the sneakers because they really had a special story. Immediately another man came up to him and asked, "You are Air Jordan on Lee Bay, right?" He immediately responded and smiled, clarifying if the guy was really a Yeezy too. Moreover, he immediately noticed that he looked exactly like him. It seems they are the same age. But why is he moving around this mall? He immediately looked down and noticed his sneakers, which surprised him a little, because they were from the new collection, and they also looked very nice on his feet. The guy immediately congratulated him and said, "You got it all. I ain't too shabby, I guess." But he hesitated for a second, because Mr. Air Jordan, unlike what you posted, there's a huge dent on the box. This is huge problems for me. This is like an E-Trade 101. Sharp eye. I should have switched the box too. He had an accident on the way, and was so scared that he dropped the box. Even though it was damaged, its contents were intact and unharmed. Take a look at this. Oh, they look really good, but wasn't anyone discouraged by the smell? He was very surprised, for the sneakers were really starting to stink. The guy was worried because did he really notice it? All he had in mind was that the buyer would buy them as quickly as possible. So he clarified that it was the smell of vacuum packaging. They had only recently been made. Seeing that such a silly argument wasn't working, the guy slapped the table and said that, just like that, he would do a 20% discount on the whole deal. After that, the buyer thought, because such a huge discount could not help but surprise. At this point, the guy apologized again and said it was just a crazy price and offered a discount of even 40%. How's that for him? He was trying to do everything he could to sell the sneakers and was very worried. That's really great. So he agreed but said he would still take vouchers from the mall in return, which everyone agreed to and made the deal. As you can imagine, at this mall, the guy had just sold his pair of sneakers, which had suffered an accident and had completely lost their marketability. Meanwhile, in the city, life continued and everything was quiet. The girl was walking down the street and catching glances of people passing by, who turned around and watched her beauty. She realized that this day was the worst day of her life. And immediately afterwards, she remembered that it looked like Kebab had already finished eating now. I wish I hadn't spoiled anything. She had such thoughts and looked at her phone. I cannot let my guard down. I oughta bring Kebabo over here and move the soul arc somewhere safe. Time to work for a living. Kebabo, come over to this realm now. These were the thoughts in her head. Then she turned on her phone and ordered Soul Arc Unleash. She summons Kabbalah. Then she clicked on it and an image of a girl appeared. She couldn't figure out why this photo was on the loading screen. Could it be a mistake of some kind? She was panicked and worried if she could handle it on her own. She started to press the button with her fingers, but was frightened by the fact that the phone did not recognize fingerprints in any way. After that, the realization of how it happened came to her. After all, first she rushed after the child. Then she fell to the ground, helped by a guy who had the exact same device, which they had accidentally swapped without realizing it themselves. When the girl realized the seriousness of the situation, she panicked and started biting her lips when she realized that it was that guy's phone. What was the world coming to? After that, she got up abruptly and started running in the opposite direction, because she just wanted to catch him without wasting much effort. He just wouldn't get away with it. Two of us. In the meantime, the same guy was running near the high-rise, who this time was already trying to get away from the place quickly, so that the sneaker shopper wouldn't discover anything and get hit in the head for it. Tired from his run, he stopped to rest, because he no longer had the strength to run. He looked away and said no hard feelings. It was just business. So just now he blocked this guy, before he knew it. Taking his phone in his hands, he didn't understand what was going on. Suddenly his phone began to glow and emit an unusual bright glow that dazzled everything around him. It was not hard to guess that it really scared the young guy who could not understand what was going on. The loading screen came on, which already showed him that the process was almost complete, and something unknown was approaching. His face was very frightened. The phone literally began to burn in his hands. It was very scary to watch this process. Suddenly, some unknown purple glare formed and an electrical explosion that threw the guy a few meters away in a blast wave. As he flew away, he started screaming and didn't understand why a reflection of the village was appearing in one of the purple circles. What was that all about anyway? At that moment, the blue blast wave came into contact with the purple blast wave and began to merge with each other, forming a portal that led to an incomprehensible magical city. The guy looked and couldn't believe that these portals were actually getting bigger. As he stood there, in a few minutes, 4 completely different portals formed around him, leading to separate cities or linking to each other. You couldn't tell for sure yet, but it looked like the guy started to get sucked into this portal and even started to glow. And then, after a minute, the system still teleported him to a new city. He was puzzled, but now that it had happened, he had to reconnoiter. He didn't know what had happened, but it really was some kind of, "It's annoying," per se. "I told you to stay put." At this moment, another spectator was watching him and marveling at his movements. It really could not leave the connoisseurs of dance unconcerned. He was completely oblivious to the fact that he was being spoken to by a girl whose words he was letting slip past his ears. She turned around and looked up with her pretty eyes, saying that if he was already here, let him have a piece too. She was also very pretty. After she also saw a guy who was really into her, which also made her very pleasantly surprised. But then she realized that he really wasn't Scarlet. Without giving the guy a word, she turned around and continued eating, adding that she thought you were someone else. At this point she was frightened though, because how did he get here, and who was he anyway? At least let him introduce himself. He said hello at once, saying his name was Torin Kim. But the girl wouldn't even listen to him, and said it, Kunlun spy, throwing a sharp object at him. The guy couldn't have expected such a reaction, so he got hit right in the head. But the girl didn't care. She was doing it all in the name of justice, after which a huge key began to glow near her hand, which blinded everything around it and had magical power. She held it up high and said she would not forgive it and would vanquish you. After that, the key started its transformation and got very big, activating the public execution mode. The girl looked very intimidating with those sticks, which were several times her own size, but nevertheless, she was still ready to fight. But it was not needed, because Torin Kim just continued to lie on the floor and did not move as he received a blow that can be compared to a hit by an arrow from a bow. After a while, there was some more action, after which the guy was already eating the same kebab that flew into him. The girl became suddenly very polite and started apologizing for mistaking the guy for a spy. So, as an apology, she offered him a taste of this nutritious kebab, and Torin didn't mind either, so he immediately agreed, clarifying whether he could really eat it. After which he began to eat absolutely all the dishes that were on this table, and the girl stepped aside and suspiciously began to click something on the phone. She looked into her reflection and was really pleased that he was so naive. This may appear to be just a phone, but it is undoubtedly the relic Soul Arc. This should be in Scarlet's hands. What happened? She looked at the guy again and said that in any case, some malfunction must have allowed him to log in and travel to the net sphere. All I gotta do now is delete his records and reset everything back to normal. The girl became very happy and started smiling, clicking and looking at the complex holograms on her phone. She tried to send the guy to the trash, and smiling, and also clicking on the hologram with his picture. She said, and just like that, we are good to go. But the message from the system surprised her very much, because access is denied, which she could not understand. Error after error kept popping up, which made her uncomfortable and, let's face it, a little panicky, because it can't be. There's no way she can remove this. Something must have disturbed the order of causality, per se. Looking toward the guy, she added that this will messier the longer he stays here, per se. The girl walked up to him and ordered him to leave, saying it was time. She will treat him to even more kebab skewers next time, per se. She then handed him the phone that had fallen out during his fall. He stood up and said absolutely nothing to her, because he didn't understand what was going on, and the girl just wanted to send him back right away. After activating the magic spell, the girl said that it would not be an easy day for him, but absolutely no need to worry. The mighty Fave will catch up with him after finishing up here. After that, the portal opened again, from which the guy came into this world, and then there was a bright purple flash that blinded everything around it and began to attract objects and the guy to itself. He was scared, but the girl told him it was a dimension portal, and he couldn't even understand what it was. That is actually a thing? That is incredible. The girl then went up to the guy and told him that these were just side effects of the measurement portals, They could include hair loss and infertility, but she asked the guy not to worry. He was really quite shocked by this, because he certainly didn't expect to hear this. But the girl also added, saying that she takes absolutely full responsibility if these symptoms are fatal. So she patted him on the shoulder again and smiled very sweetly. The guy was starting to get really expensive, asking could he really become a eunuch from that? That's why he needs to think about this decision first. He was really very scared after all. No one would want that to happen to him. But the girl asked him not to worry so much because she completely covered him, and Huyan would be right behind him. It was really very intense, and he turned to the girl to ask him, isn't there absolutely no other solution? But something completely went wrong, because the girl had already started to untwist and wanted to kick the guy with all her might. He stopped once more to ask what was going on, but the girl was already serious and proceeded to kick the guy, after which he went flying straight into the portal that she had created. After that, she really became very sweet and charming, saying that there was absolutely nothing to worry about, and she would take care of him for the rest of his life. But the guy was really pissed off and didn't understand why he had to, because the girl had just robbed his hair and testicles. He would be very unhappy without it. But Strange Girl just started waving her hands and saying goodbye to the guy, asking him to wait on the other side. And also, if he had any questions or problems, he could call her and ask for help. But the guy was already flying very, very far away. This whole world and the day he decided to sell those sneakers. The portal has now completely closed, bringing the guy back to the very same megapolis. But after seeing him fall from a skyscraper, he continues to scream and panic, because it really does look like he's going to die. Have you ever seen a man fall from a skyscraper and calmly survive? Neither have I. The moment the guy flies, he still doesn't realize what just happened. It's just some kind of curse. Eunuch or not, he's in a free fall now and is really about to fall to the sidewalk. He was really cursing this girl in the moment he met her. But as he was approaching the ground, he realized that this was definitely not how he wanted to die. At that moment, he took his phone again and squeezed it very tightly, after which it lit up and lit up brightly. There seemed to be some kind of flash, and out of the spark, that would give him something new now. And indeed it did. There was a click, and the guy started glowing as well and probably teleported somewhere again. The popular girl and the guy with the blue hair became very wary. They seemed to sense that something unusual and strange was happening right now, and then behind the wheel of his brand new Porsche he shouted sharply, "There it is!" The sneaker buyer was sitting in his house enjoying his purchase, when he suddenly picked up the sneaker and found that it was just a low-quality shoe that could have been thrown in the trash. He immediately closed his eyes, after which he clenched his fist very hard, saying that after such an act, Torin would be dead. His eyes began to glow with hatred, and there was a slight smile on his face. At that moment in the sky flew the same guy who kept clutching his phone in his hands. He looked brave enough, even though he was very scared and hated the whole world for it. And so, his distance between the ground was at 20 meters. He started sticking out his hand, trying to somehow smooth out the fall on which he landed. His body hung in the air, and his legs, which had very nice sneakers on, spread apart. And in the position of a professional street dancer, he landed on the ground, which surprised pedestrians, who looked at him and were very surprised. It was really hard, almost unreal, to believe that. Where else had you seen something like that? At this point, another spectator watched him and marveled at his movements. It really couldn't leave the dance connoisseurs unconcerned. In his gaze, he had completely forgotten that he was being addressed by a girl whose words he was letting slip past his ears. You, Ira, the one who begged me to go out with you." She was embarrassed, wondering if he was making fun of her. This amount of attention made Torin very embarrassed and did not continue to part with his phone in his hands. "You know what? Maybe it's my fault. I'm sorry, okay? What are you even sorry for? Do you even know?" He was perplexed by the question, for he had not expected such a thing, when suddenly something distracted him again. The guy's phone kept glowing a very bright blue glow, and he wouldn't let go of it. The black guy was very surprised as he realized it was Solark. The girl kept distracting him as the guy didn't want to listen to her at all, so she suggested they just break up, which he gladly agreed to. She couldn't believe it, because was he really serious? But he wasn't joking. The girl did not expect such a reaction from him, so she wanted to clarify. Are you sure you are not going to regret? Get it over with it already. Just walk away, baby. He became very aggressive and buffalo-like. His eyes began to glow orange, and he was several times bigger than her. She deafs? He told her to get lost. His face was unrecognizable. He really looked like a bull, and his veins had turned green. The girl was crying, watching all this, because she also did not understand what was happening to him at the moment when he began to transform and increase in size. In an instant, the flash around him began to shine with green light absolutely everywhere. Everyone was shocked by this turn of events. No one could believe it. The blast wave threw away dozens of meters more people who were nearby. But that's not all. It also hit the cars that were moving along the road. In one of them sat a guy with blue hair who couldn't understand why his motor had died. He was perplexed. Absolutely all city traffic stopped, every driver complaining that their engines were broken, and no one had even guessed what was going on yet. The girl fell to the floor and saw some kind of large metal leg that looked like the hoof of a bull. It turned out to be true, and she wasn't imagining it. Her boyfriend had just turned into a real bull. He started screaming and waving his arms. I got carried away and blew my cover. But nevertheless, it's finally time to wild out. Meanwhile, evil bull lifting into the air a small and fragile girl who used to date him for quite some time, back when the bull was a simple guy and had not transformed into an evil animal. It was obvious that she was really very scared, especially when he addressed her in a very strict and disrespectful way. The floor is not clean. Dawn, spoil your shirt, girl. I hate this. She just listened to him silently and tried not to make any unnecessary movements to stay in one piece and not get hurt. He then put her on the ground, saying that it was over between them now, so it was time to say goodbye. He continued his rude remarks in her direction. Even though the girl tried one more time to calm him down, she cried and said that she had always known he was a bad guy, but she couldn't even imagine that he was actually an evil monster. After that, she couldn't think of anything better to do than to take out her phone and take selfies with it to post on social media. He didn't like that very much. Torin watched what was happening and also did not understand what such an interesting and eventful day was like. First, he was almost killed, and now a bull, several times his size, appears before his eyes and runs toward the girl to take her phone. The bull became very aggressive and started growling, ordering the guy to stop in his seat and not move. This made him very frightened, for he had never been threatened by an animal before, so he decided to ask if the complaint was really in his direction. But the monster pointed at him and said, "Who else, doofus? Stay right there with that thing in your hand. Do you know what I'm saying?" This made the boy very frightened and unsure of what to do. The only thing he could shout out was that he still wasn't sure if the monster was talking to him. The bull became even more aggressive and ran in his direction, ordering the guy not to be so bold and to throw the phone to the ground immediately. People were also shocked and no one understood what was going on. Some of them even assumed that a movie was going on right now. Even motorists stopped on the roads because they were shocked that no one even reported that the shooting will take place in Tehran Road, which is some serious special. But people didn't care. In any case, they wanted to record this moment in order to put it on Instagram. Bull doesn't like it very much, so he shouted again, saying that he ordered him to stop with the shooting. Okay, none of them want to listen? Then he would teach them proper manners. After unlocking the phone, he leveled up and started filming all the people on the camera in the same way, or so it would seem at first glance, because in fact there was a clack, The phone opened and all the devices nearby began to shock, as well as a shockwave formed. All the devices that were nearby were destroyed, including the video cameras and alarm systems. The city's security system also malfunctioned, and all equipment was destroyed and disabled. The chief ordered to check all possible connections, but absolutely everything went down. One of them ordered a pizza at all and will now be left without an order. People took out their phones and were absolutely unable to call anyone or access social media. But the bull stood his ground and was unstoppable. He continued to activate the hologram and said that he hadn't planned for it to go this far. Torin watched the situation and did not understand how he took out all the devices. Bull continued his remarks as he was already the local star that everyone listened to. He asked people to look at what they made him do, and then he turned the magical hologram into his sword-like weapon. He also kept whispering the phrases, "Spare the rod, spoil the child." Then he swung and struck the ground with his weapon. It was the boom bap hammer, with which he could smash absolutely anything in his path. It was time to take a few more blows. Jumping up, he said he wanted to set the tone for you with this fresh new single. He swung properly and rose into the air, looking very intimidating, and then immediately struck the ground with his hammer, creating a large ball of dust. Moreover, the ground underfoot also began to crack, which people could not expect and were very frightened. So the bull came up to them and said that this definitely was not a movie and proceeded to scare them. Everyone was shocked by what he had done and scattered around. His eyes began to burn yellow. He felt like the king of this world, ordering the guy next to him to come hither. He was already beside him and told him to give him what was in his hands. People saw what was happening and began to panic, and Torin was no exception. He pulled out his phone and asked what was going on anyway. First he was in free fall and almost died, and now this gangsta cow is attacking him as well? He immediately remembered the words of the girl who had informed him before she left that it would not be an easy day for him. But what did she mean by that? That cow's really having at it. If I get mixed up in this, I might actually die. It worried him a lot and made him think. He stepped with his foot and realized that the first thing he needed to do was to get away from this place as quickly as possible. He also began to worry why there were no police anywhere, because when you need them, they're never there. Come earn your buck and protect this distressed civilian, for it is their time to shine and prove that his taxes have not been wasted. At that moment, right in front of his eyes appeared the hooves of a monster that landed practically in front of him and tried to stop him. His name was Lyric, and he said that if the guy tried to run away again, he would turn him into a pool of blood. He then took him by the sweatshirt and lifted him a meter above the ground, saying he should have listened to him at first. And while the guy was trying to figure out what this monster wanted from him, the bull tossed him up dozens of feet at once. The boy was screaming and scared. He didn't understand what all this was happening to him today. The bull also looked in his direction and began to prepare for the fight by taking his hammer in his hands, squeezing it tightly and twisting it around his body. He looked very strong and intimidating. Hardly anyone could create competition for him, much less this little guy. He continued to growl and crouched on the ground to push off and fly higher. It turns out he also has some nice blue amps in his hooves. He then approached the guy, who also noticed a huge 3-meter bull flying at him, who in addition also swung his huge weapon, which is also several times larger for its size. It looks like the end is coming, because the hammer is almost near the guy's head, and surviving such a blow is really unreal. You know that? Suddenly, his eyes snapped shut and he was very shocked. But not from the blow, but from what began to happen next. It turned out that the blow with the hammer had been taken by the foot of the guy with blue hair who had been after our hero at the beginning and wanted to kill him as well. But now he decided to save him and threw the bull a dozen yards back, which he certainly could not have expected, and became much more aggressive from such, because he was not used to the fact that anyone could resist him. While he was trying to figure out what had just happened, his body rapidly hit the walls of the skyscraper. At that moment, the rescuer grabbed the guy by the hood and tossed him up, also wanting to hit him with all his might on the ground. Torin looked around and asked what would happen this time, while his savior grinned and pulled a comb out of his hands. Abel sure knows what he's talking about. I get it now. He immediately smiled and brushed his hair as he arrived here just in time for party. His eyes also lit up and turned red, and he complimented the boy, saying he had a great toy. But Torin was shocked. He didn't understand how he also knew he had a Scarlet's phone. It was impossible to believe. A hardcore fan? Wanna hand it over? No, I can't. It is Scarlet's, and it is probably expensive. Look, kid, I don't care. Just hand it over. At this point, a huge explosion formed behind them, while the guy with blue hair continued to threaten the guy. He was frightened and tried to cover his face with his hands, while his savior looked around. Smiling, he said that enough with the side quests, geez, and with all his might struck the bull that had just appeared near them. Go graze the fields, you dawn cow. I got shit to take care of right now. And Torin and the other people were watching the whole situation and were very surprised because the guy had only dealt with him with bare hands. Bull didn't want to just give up, so he got to his feet and got pissed off that the little shit was ruining his style. So he became very aggressive, saying that he will get rid of you, Liangshan trash, once and for all. A dialogue immediately began between them. They could not concede to each other in any way, so each tried to prove their advantage. Trash? You must have plowed your own brains out. Time to beat some sense into you. His anger mode kicked in, and he started to burn. The moment the guy was surprised that he had started it himself. The bull did not appreciate such a statement in his direction, and tore the jewelry from his neck. It was obvious that he wanted to destroy the guy for such statements, and indeed, the jewelry flew right into his face, as the guy with the blue hair dodged and started laughing, asking, is that really all he can do? Let him throw harder. At this point, from an overabundance of emotion and adventure, the guy started praying and promising that he would become a much better person. He started asking God to just send him home alive. The hammer blow immediately flew. How dare you condescend plowing? The bull added that farmers have an illustrious history of 10,000 years. They harmonize their blood, sweat, and tears with nature. He got angry and started waving his hands around, adding that he will pay for his insolence. That was primary revolution. The blue-haired guy started laughing and said that was exactly what he was talking about earlier, then activated the superpowers in his hands. He also created a weapon from his hand and began to wave it around, also forming yellow glares. At that moment, the bull jumped up and made the strongest possible blow with his hammer. Between them formed a big fight for life and death. The two monsters with superpowers decided to find out which one of them will be right. There was smoke all around, covering everything. The bull didn't understand what happened, because the blue-haired guy was holding something that looked like a blade, adding that all bark and no bite, just like the rest of you Jinmu runts. After that, he continued his attack, and the confrontation continued. The bull immediately activated the blasters from his back, after which he immediately flew up. Their confrontation continued in the air, where the blue-haired boy was forced to go as well. So they were already fighting in the air. The bull did not appreciate such blows from his opponent, saying that it was such a cheap move. But no more, you scum. Everything was on fire, and a few seconds later, 4 red streaks ran down the blue-haired guy's body, leaving him very surprised and shocked. And then, a second later, when he realized what had happened, the bull tore him apart with his hammer, forming dark smoke all around him. But he managed to dodge and back away in time, even though the stripes were on his body. Immediately after that, he flew up into the air 12 meters, which the bull absolutely did not expect. He pulled out his machine gun and told the piece of meat that he was here now. And now it was his turn for revenge, and the huge number of bullets he was trying to hide from flew at the bull. But for him, it was child's play. So he decided to show him what the Jinwo's Mado technology really tasted like. The guy was very amused by this and wondered if the bull could move after that. But he stopped him, because enough talk, it's time to move on to the second part. After that, bright flames began to glow from his splinters, which the bull clearly did not expect. With each second he received more damage to his side, and it seems that he was really in unbearable pain. At that moment, the result of the machine gun began to take effect, which made the guy with the blue hair not stop cheering and smiling. "What did I tell ya? You should have stuck to grass grazing." He pointed his machine gun at him again and added, "By the way, tell Talia and his 10 celestials that I miss them," then pointed another charge in his direction. He was ready to finish the fight, but the bull was also pissed off, for how dare he disrespect the Grandmaster. There the army of 12 will turn him to ash. Disrespect? I owe you worthless traitors nothing. Have some goddamn shame. The bullets from the machine gun flew in his direction and pierced the bull's entire body, which shook him senseless. After that, the guy stopped, blew on his gun, and said that finally the bull would pay for it all. Time over. It's time to hit the road. After these words, something unbelievable began. The bull began to tear apart. The red stripes were getting larger and larger. Suddenly, the bullets increased tenfold in size and covered the entire space surrounding the bull, which he clearly did not expect. Well, the guy with the blue hair kept laughing at the situation and said he would see the bull next season. Meanwhile, the story continues with a confrontation between two monsters, in which the guy with blue hair defeated a huge bull that got in his way. He was even thrown up several dozen meters. So now it was time for the next contestant. He looked at Torin and ordered him to stop where he was. But a second later, there was maximum surprise on his face, because he didn't even know what to do or how to react to it. The guy ran so fast that it was really quite problematic to notice him. Pedestrians diverged on the sides because the guy could have run someone off the road holding his phone. He was as frightened as possible, driven by fear and his instinct for self-preservation. He tried to warn all the people around him to be more careful, because it is really not safe to be here. He never parted with his phone and held it in his hands all the time, after which it began to glow with a very strong blue light again, which attracted the attention of another very beautiful girl, who was surprised by this energy. At this point, the movers were taking the boxes into the house and also didn't understand how he got so much energy. Her eyes lit up. I can sense the energy from the net sphere. It must be. They both stared at this cell phone, which also stood out from them. The loader also understood that this could not be a mistake of any kind. It was really Soul ARK. They both began to glow, and it seemed that their transformation had begun as well, as white blood began to flow through their veins, shining all around them. The guy held his phone and closed his eyes. He did not understand what was happening again and what was wrong with his eyes, because the bright flashes blinded absolutely everything and everyone around him. With the soul arc, they can become a celestial. The guy was frightened and very surprised by this, because he had just survived 2 monsters fighting over his phone, and now 2 more monsters were standing in front of him, who also kept talking to him and making a point of what he was holding in his hands. But unlike the previous enemies, they themselves wanted to get out of here as soon as possible. The guy asked them to calm down and asked if they were here about the phone. Then why don't they make a deal in that case? He wouldn't ask for much in return. But they were wary and didn't want to listen to him at all, charging their weapons and ordering the guy to raise his hands, or he would be destroyed. A second later, they started firing guns at him, which was already obvious. Even he was just laughing, because what's wrong with trying to make a few dollars in this situation? Everything around him was falling apart. Blasts from the blaster melted the bus stop completely. But the guy didn't care at all. He was still having fun. When he saw the blaster beside him, he laughed and asked, "Is that Mommy beside him?" But the monster was unstoppable. His hand became very hot and began to glow. His partner also came over to help him. He really didn't want to be forced to repeat himself, so he ordered the guy to put his hands up one more time. If not, he would get a big dose of nasty burn that he would never forget. The guy with the blue hair was already behind them and started smiling asking if that was it, since his voice sounded much more intimidating. He hugged his abusers and put his arms around their shoulders, which they clearly were not expecting. With a laugh, he let them know that, unfortunately, he was now the next customer, so they would have to wait on the line. What in tarnation? Errand of Mount Liang? What in the devil? They wanted to figure out what was going on here and who this guy was, but he made it clear to them that it was none of their business who he was. But the monster agreed, saying that he would just stick his cap in his knee. But the guy didn't care. He was having a lot of fun. He really wanted to see how he would try it, because he had already captured one of the monsters on a chokehold. His accomplice didn't like it very much, so he decided to show him a few lessons as well by loading his weapon. But the guy didn't care. He was as happy as possible to talk to them, despite the fact that a few seconds later, half of the skyscraper was completely destroyed. And all this in the heart of the city. The blue-haired guy was surprised by this blow, because this hole could have been in him if he hadn't bounced back in time. The monster charged his fist and reminded him that he had ordered the guy to leave. But he had no emotion other than laughter. The monster looked very small and helpless, unlike his partner. And while he was thinking about how to attack, the blue-haired guy pounced on them and kept trying to break them. They didn't like it, of course, and they were already wondering why they let him behave this way, so they needed to teach him a lesson immediately. At this point, while the monsters were fighting again, Torin ran away again, because a real salesman never misses an opportunity. Seeing this, the guy with the blue hair ordered him back, which really surprised the monsters, because how does he manage to still look for his partners now? But something happened that no one was prepared for. He opened his jacket and tore himself apart, telling them to try to cram it in. He was very aggressive because he really needed to prove his superiority to them. Breaking the robot, he asked them once again, who do they think they are? After that, he calmed down a bit and said that they should listen. Let them try to attack again if they live to dawn. The monsters lay down and promised the guy that he would pay for everything as he raised his weapon. But something didn't go according to plan, because at that moment there was a huge bunch of people watching and filming him. He wiped a little dirt off the body and said it would be better to clean it all up. Then he took out his phone and told the audience to say cheese, also activating his device, which began to dazzle everyone around him. And it looks like the same result will happen now, when the same device was used by the bull. Meanwhile, the story begins with a guy running, who, knowing that being in this place is not particularly safe, the guy decided to run away right away, so that he would not run into any more monsters along the way. But this could not be avoided. They all stopped to ask if this is really Soul Arc. They wanted to take it for themselves, but at that moment, the guy with the blue hair also ran after the guy, who had already shown absolutely everyone how good he was. So he had no trouble destroying these monsters with his machine gun. He smiled and pulled out his memory wiping device, asking everyone to look in that direction and smile, whereupon a huge crowd of people formed around him, looking with wonder and incomprehension at the bright glare of the device. This was followed by the sound of explosions that could be heard at every point in the city. Moreover, most of it fell on the building of the nearest skyscraper. The result was a huge cloud of smoke and a black hole right in the center of the building that looked like the site of a shell landing. If you take a closer look at it, it's not hard to see that it's actually behind this incomprehensible round thing. You can safely see what's on the other side of the building. It looks like it pierced through it. Immediately thereafter, the guy with the red sneakers took a step, trying to figure out what was going on here. It was the same sneaker buyer who also appeared rather unexpectedly and clarified that it looked like the guys were having a lot of fun without him. Surprisingly, he looked calm enough. The other part of the metropolis continued to function quietly. Cars drove, buildings were intact, and the sky was intensely blue. At that moment, Torin was trying to blend in with the crowd at Gangnam Station so no one would notice him. It wasn't hard to see that he was really worried and anxious. Suddenly, another black hooded monster appeared in front of him, glowing and trembling. Turns out it was a huge polar bear with an interesting bow on its head that was screaming and ordering the guy to give him the soul ARK. He immediately picked the guy up and proceeded to threaten him, saying that maybe it has been too long since I have eaten this delicacy. But he couldn't even be frightened properly anymore, because what had happened to him in the last 30 minutes had taken almost all of his emotions away. The bear began to yell at him sharply, saying that he would only need one bite, which, let's face it, also scared the guy. Suddenly, arrows started flying at the bear, fired by the blue-haired guy. He was not very happy to see the guy again, since this is getting tedious every time to fight a bunch of monsters. He also smiled and said the guy owed him a little chat now, don't he think? The guy at this point was trying to wriggle out of the bear that was hanging on him and was very aggressive. He was angry at him, saying that he was a maniac and he owed him absolutely nothing. He loaded his gun and asked the guy to repeat what he had said, but he was affirmative, and even though he was frightened, he repeated that he owed him absolutely nothing. At this point, the guy with the blue hair was very angry. Not in a bad way at all. That's why he activated his machine gun and started shooting in the guy's direction, once again asking, did he really just call him a maniac? Really, he was furious. And the guy started running away, saying that this is way out of my league. He absolutely couldn't understand why the police were idle. Couldn't they serve and protect? He was hanging onto his head when suddenly he saw the car of the police. He was very excited because finally he would be saved. That's why he ran up to them and asked them very strongly for help. He jumped on their car, which they absolutely could not have expected, continuing to shout that he really needed help. The driver of the car at this point was very surprised and frightened, because he didn't know what it was or who the guy was. But he climbed up on their windshield and started waving his hands and banging on it. Immediately, a dialogue formed between them, one of them asking, can he take care of this guy for him? To which the latter replied, very simply, should he arrest him? Butterin was very excited and scared. He begged them to do something, pointing at the guy who was next to him, because he was trying to kill him. The cops were shocked, and one of them got out of his car and started yelling at the guy to get away from it, because it was defacing city property. The guy agreed, and added that he was in danger and needed help. At this point, the guy with the blue hair was really very aggressive and smiling, his eyes glowing red. It was obvious that he couldn't take a joke right now. Torin was trying to convince them that he would literally shoot up the city, especially since it was already in ruins because of him. Moreover, he added that this monster had been chasing him the whole time. Well, it's impossible. That is why he asked to step away from the car immediately. At that moment, a shot rang out, which threw the rear wheels of the car several meters upward, which scared everyone around him very much. And then a second later, thanks to the tremendous wave power, the car was completely flipped over, and the guy flew back a few meters, after which he hit his head and twisted several times. The guy with the blue hair had absolutely no sense of humor, but he still kept his sense of humor. He stood beside the car and started laughing, asking what that overkill. Well, the cops at this point started grabbing their heads just like the guy who got hurt. His adversary came up to him and sat down, saying that all he wanted was just a little cooperation on his part. So he asked the guy now to be a lamb and hand over the soul arc, which made him very angry. But then the guy with the blue hair was very unlucky, as a policeman's gun was pointed at his head, ordering him to put down his weapon and put his hands up. When he saw this picture, he was very surprised, asking if the police officers were really still alive. After all, this is very good. At this point, the guy started screaming really hard, addressing the police officers and telling them that this guy was a terrorist and he was very dangerous. He really understood that this was his last chance. So he ordered the police to arrest him immediately and send him straight to jail. He also began shouting and smiling, asking how he felt now after such a thing. But he was only very surprised at being threatened by ordinary people and simply pressed his device, which made a blue flash that blinded everyone around him. This made Torin begin to worry about his eyes. Suddenly, the cops didn't understand what was going on. They seemed to have amnesia and lost their memory. After that, Torin became very aggressive. Damn it, you started me. Anyways, what are you waiting for, officers? But they just started grabbing their heads and didn't understand why they had guns in their hands. And then they turned to the car and saw that it was blown up and completely overturned, which immediately made one of them cry, because he really had a lot of memories with it. At this point, his partner turned out to be a real rat, because he started to hit on him because he drove very badly, and he warned him about the possible outcome. So he wished him luck in explaining the situation, and added that a good option for him would be to write a letter of resignation. Torin was also as annoyed as possible and pounced on the policemen, asking what they were doing, as there was a real terrorist standing in front of them. But he didn't understand what he meant and asked where he was. Then the guy with blue hair ran up to them and said he was right there and activated his device again, which blinds and clears the memory. He was very amused, so he praised the guy for a great effort as he grabbed his eyes, which were hurting very badly from the bright light. When everyone had already moved on a little bit, the policeman proceeded to lash out at his partner, saying that he was in a very unpleasant situation while he was still frustrated about the car. Torin was beginning to panic because his memory wasn't wiped. He couldn't figure out what was wrong with these guys, but the guy with the blue hair never tired of laughing. He said he used Memorizer against them, which doesn't work on him alone. He was shocked and tried to understand what he meant by that. Then he showed him again the device, which had been used several times before, and again began to glow with a bright blue flash. The guy got very angry and cried, because right now he was being made blind again.